Hello, everyone. Good evening. You can hear me okay? Just making extra sure. Okay, fabulous. Um, Thank you all for being here. Thanks especially to Rachel, whom you just met, and Al and Tom. Without those individuals, I would not be giving the speech. Thank you also to all of you guys for being here. Otherwise, I'd be talking to an empty room, much less exciting. Um, let's see. As you know from the publicity materials, this is not the title of the speech, but I wonder if it might be more accurate. The talk has changed a little in its construction between now and the time when we came up with the original title. I'm going to try to speak quickly tonight. I have an enormous amount of information to share with you. This is going to be different from the regular History Cafe talk, and I hope you're okay with that. Thanks for wanting to go on this little adventure with me. In terms of structure, I'm going to give the speech, then we'll have some exciting Q&A, and then afterwards I'll have copies of the book in the back if you're interested. Even if you're not interested, come and say hi. That's much more important than buying books. We're going to begin with a story. Okay, some years ago, I was directing a short film called As They Rise, which stars the great Ryan Cooper. There he is on the right. Wonderful Seattle actor. He was playing a homeless man in my movie, and at one point during the shoot, we were working beneath a viaduct getting some shots of Ryan walking around. It was a surprise when, while we were shooting, an actual homeless person came over to have a few words with him. The man, a grungy sort in his 50s, had been observing and quickly intuited what we were trying to replicate. And he went over to Ryan and spoke in low but earnest tones. I've never forgotten, that's correct. I've never forgotten what he said. I want you guys to look at me for this part of the story. The guy started talking to Ryan, and he said, "You're not doing it right. You have to put your head into the mind space of you've got nothing to look forward to. You have absolutely nothing to anticipate to bring you up. There is no hope, no possibility, nothing. There is just this right here." Now, Ryan is a very skilled, dedicated actor who does his research. I would expect an amateur to miscalculate the actuality of homelessness, but for someone of Ryan's professional caliber to still not quite have it down was a wake-up call. None of us can completely imagine the sensation that that gentleman was describing about himself, the feeling of treading water, quite possibly forever. Ryan took the instruction well, and the man's words led to an improvement in the performance, and I remember quipping to my assistant director, we should get that guy to direct. He's better than I am. About 5 years later, I was driving the bus when I saw Avery catnapping at a bus stop bench at inbound 46th and Finney. Avery is not the homeless guy in the previous anecdote, but he's of the same condition. I knew Avery before he was homeless. He once worked at the Greenwood Library, then at Dexter Horton, then at Real Change, until all was reduced to the disappointed present, sitting on this bench right now, or sitting in the back of the bus behind a building, ever moving, never welcome. But I knew that face of his before the layers of comfort faded. He used to ride my 5, standing up front, proactively greeting all the passengers as they got on, volunteering to help with heavy bags. He was so helpful, I had to ask him to tone it down a little. He was too good at doing too much of my job. I've never asked Avery what happened to him. We all make poor decisions or find ourselves victims of other poor decisions. I simply called out his name that day I saw him lying on the bench, letting out a big wave, my hands straight up in victory mode. "Avery, I didn't mean to wake you up or anything," he says. "Oh no, I won't hold you up, but I gotta say, it is good to see you." "Oh man, Avery, it's good to see you. Have you been?" He says, "All good, always great, all love, brother. How are you?" I reply, "Beautiful as always." He says, "That's right," more to himself than to me. And I say, "Thanks for saying hey, man. I hope I see you around." He says, "I'll be out here." And I say, "You and me both. I'm going to be out here as well, and I'll be looking for you." My heart surged as I drove away. I felt so proud to know this man's name. He may be of the same condition as the man who approached our film set, but he is not of the same cloth. Avery still has hope. He has something motivating him, something forged deep within, and it bubbles to the surface every time I catch his eye. Whenever I find him, I ask after his welfare, and even if things are obviously terrible, he'll shrug it off, calling it a phase, reminding himself that he has control over the situation. I talk about him in my book, and I end the chapter on him by saying, "One day I'll see you with clean clothes and a haircut, my friend, and we'll talk about some new job you like. And we'll laugh about how it was before, laugh about the times we've made, laugh like it was before the future came to be, talking on the 5 and saying hey to people. You're out there somewhere right this minute. I believe in you. You may find the ending of that story overly optimistic, but I have to believe in goodness. I see so much that is wrong, and unlike a lot of us, I see it up close. I know the names of these guys. I have to keep my head in a sort of a Taoist mind space where I accept everything in front of me without wanting it to be any other way, because I'm not in a position of power to affect change on a mass scale. Hopefully, people who are in such positions of power to actually do something don't have such a lackadaisical attitude, but I have to keep in mind for my health, my sanity, I have to think about what I can do and what I cannot do. And what I can do is I can help on a human scale. I can make someone feel better for 5 minutes. And for me, that is entirely a worthy enough reason to get out of bed and go to work. I don't see a value difference between making eye contact with someone and building a giant complex of affordable housing. Because at the end of the day, it's all just helping. As George Eliot once wrote, what do we live for if it is not to make life less difficult for each other? People often ask me, how are you so happy? What are you on? Who are you? You know, I don't have a terrific answer for that because, of course, I have no experience besides my own to compare it to. I can mention something about being healthy or slowing down, focusing on the positive. These are things that work for me. What also helps me is confronting things rather than hiding from them. And in that vein, I'd like to do something tonight which I never do in public, which is talk about something that bothers me and that I wonder bothers a lot of us, the rest of us here in this room. I imagine a lot of us Seattleites who've been here a while get down from time to time because of Amazon, because of what Amazon, yeah, we're gonna go there, and similar corporations have done to the city. By ushering in a massive wealthy elite of young adults and reducing the ability of the middle class to stay housed in what feels like overnight, it is not unfair to say that Seattle has been forever changed. It further deepens the wound to notice that these new folks, perhaps because of their significantly different incomes, have made no discernible effort to integrate into existing communities, nor to address the instability and havoc not they, but the corporations they work for, have caused. This isn't all bad. There are some positives, mostly pragmatic, and there are negatives, mostly humanistic. But there is no denying that this is a challenging period of history for the city, especially those of us who've been here for a while. And in that spirit, before we get on to the positive stuff, and because it's okay to feel sad sometimes, I just want to get this out of our system. I'd like to share an elegy of sorts that I wrote for the painter Laura Hamgee's upcoming art book, based on a popular art show which you may know about called 53 Views of the Alaskan Way Viaduct. It's about the viaduct and it hasn't been published yet, and until it is, you will be the only folks to hear this piece, which is called Eternity. Here's one of her paintings. It is easy to forget that objects outlast loved ones. They live longer than people and carry with them the bodied memories of 1,000 ordinary days, the days when that person still wandered about the house, called you, chuckled in your ears. Objects stick around long after your spouse, parent, whomever has drifted out of your life, a casualty of death and time. You look at things differently now. Cheap chinaware from when your family spoke a different language, your child's drawings. They comfort us, objects do, defying mortality and proving real our memories. It is a bizarre thing to outlive an object. To witness the destruction and sudden absence of this massive city-defining edifice is to be unmoored. We are, as children who have lost our ancient tree, the old church or schoolyard, things seen against the sky, which fulfilled all our definitions of what is everlasting. This is what the viaduct was for those of us who were there. With shadows and stone, it reminded us of what used to be obvious, felt, and known. Seattle was a frontier town built from earth and industry and fire by hard men and resilient women, redolent with the grit-grime texture of a life you could actually touch. You felt their pioneer spirit when you drove on a structure you knew might collapse at any moment, or negotiated its awkward merges, or stumbled about in awe beneath its roaring and cavernous underbellies. For the price of bus fare, anyone and their Aunt Martha could have the best view of both the sound and the skyline at the drop of a hat. That will never be true again. There is a look in the eye of every Seattleite who knew the city pre-Amazon. We don't need to explain it to each other, and it's invisible to everyone else. We have outlived the objects that gave us an anchor in our own home. Do you know what that feels like? At the close of every long day and the start of each fresh one, in the sweet halfway house between dreams and waking life, we forget what's happened and remember the Seattle that made Seattle. The concrete, evergreen, Japanese, two-story lumberjack fisherman rail tie Boeing that was Seattle. We see it as if it's still right outside, all connected by the Great Viaduct, that monolith that defined us, an engineering marvel for which we were rightly proud and which we praised and loved to lament. For just a moment, the memory feels so possible. You can almost touch it, the past you learned too late to treasure. Another cloudy morning on the upper level, car windows down, feeling that stiff saltwater breeze blast you just the way you like it. Enjoying the mighty din of freeway traffic, the only man-made sound that contains all of human life. We were there. But the thing is, it isn't really just Amazon. That's totally unfair. Or Google or Facebook or the other tech companies that reside here. Those are Seattle-specific concerns, and income inequality is something you're going to find in any major American city now. It is true that our circumstances here are concentrated, exacerbated as compared to other places. You may know that some of our homeless populations are bussed in here from around the country. A pretty interesting story that was kept hush-hush for a while, but which a team at The Guardian broke in 2017. I recommend the article. It won a number of awards. What happens is various towns across the US round up their homeless folks and give them one-way Greyhound bus tickets to Seattle. Similarly, our young rich people are also brought in from all over with the promise and the security of a high-paying job in a nice city that doesn't get hot or cold. Who can blame them? But these elements just make the problems more potent, not necessarily different. When I go to Portland or Minneapolis or Houston, I see the same dynamic. A bunch of cranes with new buildings and a bunch of tents and a bunch of disinterested young people who are doing well for themselves. That last part is what I'm interested in. The behavioral aspect. I'm not going to discuss the pros and cons of various government systems or models of housing and economics. There's other people more qualified. But in thinking about behavioral differences, I've realized this isn't a geographically or even class-specific concern so much as a generational one. There's been a shift in how people treat each other, and I'd like to explore that with you guys tonight. At least once a day, someone will say to me, "Are you old enough to drive this bus? Do you even have a license?" And if you're on my bus when that happens, you'll notice that now I just agree with them. I go along with it and say, "No, I'm not old enough." When you hear the same joke every day for 12 years, it's not funny anymore, but that's okay. I'm not gonna complain. I can see that they're being nice. It's a compliment. I'm very grateful. As I was told by a senior operator when I started bus driving, kids make fun of kids that they don't like, but adults make fun of adults that they like. So I'm totally fine being told I'm too young to drive the bus once a day, or sometimes, honestly, once an hour. But there's a side effect constantly being informed that you're 16. You find yourself thinking about generations, differences between myself and all these folks who are a decade or more younger than me, but who I guess I look like. It's hard for me to think of myself as a millennial, even though I am one. As an Asian American, you often feel caught between two unrelated cultures, neither of which wants you, and you feel like you're part of neither one. In similar fashion, I feel slightly too young to fit into the Gen X mold, whatever that is, and a little too old to call myself a millennial because I remember when Pluto was a planet. I was driving the bus the other night when I had an epiphany. There were all these beautiful young people getting on, and I found myself overwhelmed with the sensation that I don't have a clue how to relate to these folks. I felt like I have nothing in common with my own generation. It was very sad. I've been noticing my older friends and I do things that younger folks just don't do. And it isn't just that I can dial 9 or drive stick shift or remember payphones and floppy disks. Those are fun, nostalgic generational differences that are always going to be around. This wasn't that. It wasn't even the fact that none of the people getting on the bus could hear me because they all had earphones. I've sort of been able to get past that. I still just say hi to everyone because I like to. Instead, I was reminded of a date I was on once. I was on this date with somebody quite a bit older than me. This was some years ago. And at one point, the person yawned. And because they were 38, they covered their mouth when they yawned. It was awesome. I was 29, and I didn't get to go on a lot of dates with people who cover their mouths when they yawn. And I thought to myself, thank you for being a person who does that, not just because it's good manners, although that's nice, but something else. It made me want to say thank you to anybody who says bless you after a sneeze or who holds the door open. Doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman behind you. It's not about that. You hold the door open to be nice. And I realized the reason I love that type of stuff is because these are gestures of awareness. I've begun to notice how much young people are uninterested in anything that precedes their experience, such as, of course, history. There is an attitude There's an attitude of spurning the past, disregarding it, disregarding the notion that it might have something to teach us or something to build off of. 22% of millennials, that's 1 in 5, 22% of millennials have never heard of the Holocaust. 66% don't know what Auschwitz is. A third do not know what century the American Revolution took place in, and half think that the Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, and War of 1812 all took place before it. Philosopher George Santayana's famous line often gets shortened to "history repeats itself," but that is not what he said. He said those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. What fascinates me about the millennial rejection of experience is that it's not just about time, but also space. What I mean is, millennials love avoiding people. We dislike human interaction and actively seek to avoid it in widely documented ways you don't need me to tell you about it. I'm talking a lot about age tonight, but we all know these attitudes transcend age groups. It's just proportionally easier to see in young folks. What I'm really talking about is behavior. A 2018 survey has 3 out of 4 millennials refusing to answer phone calls on general principles, citing a variety of reasons like time consumption, stress, and conflict, which together point to what social psychologist Heidi Grant Halverson calls a fear of having to respond in the moment. Without the option of editing yourself, there's a vulnerability in talking, coming up with thoughts on the spot that takes practice. Henry, a 23-year-old and part of a San Diego research study, talks about how he likes texting because it gets him out of socially awkward exchanges like coming face to face with his friends' roommates or parents. Yes, terrifying. I remember being on a date. I'm telling you about all these dates tonight. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop after this one. We were at a coffee shop, and we'd been there a while, and we were curious as to what time the place closed. So I said, okay, I'll go ask them what time they close. But my date, wonderful human being, said, no, you don't have to do that. I'll look it up on my phone. I'll just pull it up on my phone. Let me figure out the Wi-Fi. For her, that was easier, or at least more attractive, than asking the person who's standing right there. Now, is that bad? Why is this an issue? Am I saying that all people should be extroverts? No. Some of my favorite people are introverts. I used to be an introvert. Some days I still am. I'm not that concerned with those sorts of attitudinal differences. This is bigger. This has more to do with caring about other human beings. Because if you don't talk to other human beings, it's easy to stop caring about them. And it's easy to not notice that that change has happened. An over-reliance on tech means you don't get to practice that improvisatory talking muscle. Basically, communications technology has made young people really bad at communicating, and we know it. And thus we make decisions or apps that do not require it. I'm diving deep with these concerns with you tonight because history is a focus on what changes, and we are living in an intensely historical time. What gets underemphasized in historical records? I would argue everyday life, everyday plebeian existence, the textures of ordinariness. My book and the blog are an attempt to nail down what that felt like. I know that my stuff isn't historical in the dramatic sense, but it's a record of how we talked, how we treated each other from time to time in the early 21st century. Not during the big moments, but during the in-between moments. And not just affluent folk, but everyone. This is what we sounded like. I love exploring that, celebrating it, and I feel lucky because I'm in a unique position to observe habits and trends across a huge cross-section of people when they're just out doing their thing. And the thing is, there is something happening here, to quote Bob Dylan, with the new generation that is unique. I think it's exciting. I don't understand it. And I know that years from now, we're going to call it history, which is why I'm talking about it with you tonight. In 2011 and 2012, psychologists and social scientists began noticing dramatic changes in how young people behave in ways that had never happened before. In behavior studies, you're usually analyzing trends that slowly adjust over a period of decades. This was different. For the very first time, starting in 2011, all the lines on the graphs were either nosedives or skyrocketing lines. And the things people were doing differently covered every aspect of young adult life, and they were uniform across race and class demographics, which never happens. Okay, what types of behaviors are we talking about? Before we look at these graphs, I want to say 2 things. One, it's instructive at this point to bifurcate the word millennial into 2 categories. It no longer makes sense to call somebody born in 1980 the same generation as somebody born in '05. It's too big of a time span. Psychologist Jean Twenge, PhD, has coined the term iGen to refer to people born after 1995, whereas millennials would be the set before that, born in the 80s and 90s who came of age in the 2000s. Okay, why are we calling them iGen? That sounds like a toothpaste or a disease. Why not Gen Z, which you've probably heard of? The reason you've heard of Gen Z is because we're not Gen Zers, most of us here. And only people who aren't Gen Z say Gen Z. The reason Gen Z isn't gonna catch on is because generations never like being called a term that's derivative of the previous generation's label. That's why baby boom echo or baby busters never caught on for Gen X, and that's also why Gen Y never became popular because that sounds so second rate. For the same reason, Gen Z, they're not gonna call themselves the last letter in the alphabet. And that's why Ms. Twenge has come up with iGen as an alternative, which maybe they'll go for. Honestly, I don't think they will. I think it sounds kind of weird. But for the purpose of this speech, I'll use the term iGen or iGeners to refer to people born after 1995. What's a millennial? What's an iGener? They're both looking at their phone all the time. How do I tell the difference? I'm generalizing like crazy up here, by the way. You guys are adults, you know this. We're doing statistical analysis of massive groups of people. It comes with the territory. But just to give you a mental picture for millennials, let's imagine a nice couple of guys with big beards and plastic frame glasses who like artisanal cheese and love talking to you about microbrews, and maybe they have a bunch of tattoos. iGeners don't care about artisanal cheese. They like Snapchat. They know what a snap streak is. If you do too, you're in with the cool kids. They think Lord of the Rings is really old and that Facebook is for people's grandmothers. Also, they are delightful. We'll get to that later, not yet. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say, before showing you tons of exciting graphs, I have a whole bunch of stuff to show you. I'm thrilled. Thank you for being here. Is that when you're researching generational differences, it's useful to look for data from polls that have been running long enough to include multiple generations. Why? A one-time poll with no comparison group won't be able to separate the effects of age from the effects of generation. For example, if you find a poll that says 86% of millennials are having trouble finding jobs, which is true, well, gosh, maybe that's also true of boomers. How are you supposed to know? If they're only looking at millennials, then you have no way of knowing, and from a comparative standpoint, the data is completely useless. If you're trying to understand trends, it helps to go further back to get perspective. One database I find useful is called Monitoring the Future. MTF has been asking high school seniors over 1,000 questions every year since 1976. Pretty awesome. That's a sample size literally in the millions. The graphs I'm about to show you stem from MTF, also the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System, which is part of the CDC, the American Freshman Survey, which started in '66, and the General Social Survey begun in '72. By the way, I have sources for all of this data on my website and printed out over there if you want to read an enormous bibliography when you go home tonight. Please, I printed those out for a reason. Please take them. So iGeners, not starting when they were born, but starting when they were in high school, specifically during 2011 and 2012, they started changing. How? Okay, I'm gonna go through these quickly. I have a lot of exciting stuff to show you. They stopped going out as often unsupervised. Notice the drop in 2011 there. They started dating less, a lot less. Following through with that, they started having less sexual contact, which among other things leads to less teen pregnancies. Also less STDs. They're the only age group getting less STDs, as you can see. The rest of us are still bumping those numbers up. They lost the desire to drive cars or even get driver's licenses, which if you were a parent in the 90s or earlier has got to be blowing your mind. Because they're not driving, they're not getting as many tickets or accidents. They more or less stopped working part-time jobs or having money from those jobs. Summer jobs, a thing of the past. In addition to losing interest in summer jobs, they've also lost interest in binge drinking. Not only that, they pretty much lost interest in alcohol altogether. These are percentages for people who've ever tried more than a few sips. That's a 50% reduction for those 8th graders, the bottom dotted line. They don't like taking risks starting in 2011. They don't get pleasure out of doing dangerous things. They fight less. The whole meet me behind Taco Bell after school, that's not how intimidation works anymore. They don't run away from home anymore, which implies they must at least generally be okay with how things are going. They get into less fights with their parents. They're also a lot more supervised. These are high schoolers whose parents always know where they are. They don't like reading. Those upticks at the bottom are for the question, did you not read books for pleasure last year? That's why those lines are increasing. This is going to come as contrary to those of you who know the 2014 Pew Research study, which libraries and publishers love to tout. Here it is. Which said that young people are reading more, especially more print literature. That was a classic example of bad data collection. Not only did they not look at previous generations, they also included required reading course materials like textbooks, totally invalidating their premise of voluntary reading. This is a more accurate picture. Now, before we get too depressed, let's notice that here, top dotted line, if 50% of teens didn't read 2 or more books for pleasure last year, that means the other 50%, half of all teens are reading 2 or more books for pleasure every year, which I think is fabulous. Just good to keep some perspective. They're not reading magazines or newspapers. Great, nobody else is. Moving on. They're definitely paying the price for not reading because their SAT scores for reading and comprehension and writing have taken a nosedive. Check out that 13-point drop from 2011. They're spending less overall time, on homework, extracurricular activities, volunteers, sports, etc. Here they are not watching TV as much, which I think is wonderful. Here they are not going to movies anymore, which makes me want to cry. But I guess it's not about me. They don't go to parties. The whole super bad, crazy party thing, the American Pie type stuff, you'll notice they don't really make movies like that much anymore. Now teen movies are dystopian, post-apocalyptic survival narratives. They don't really hang out. Earlier we looked at going out unsupervised. This is kids who hang out every day, not a thing. Going to shopping malls, definitely no longer a thing. I think we probably all know of a shopping mall that's closing someplace. So there's all these things they're not doing. They're not working, they're not driving, hanging out, dating, fighting, having intercourse, volunteering, crashing their cars, binge drinking, doing homework, getting pregnant, or reading. What are they doing? You know what they're doing. They're on their phone. 2011 and 2012 were the years when internet smartphones became ubiquitous, and iGeners are the first group to have smartphones in adolescence. The timing is wrong to pin any of this on the 2008 crash. Nothing else happened in 2011, 2012 except the major lifestyle shift towards smartphones with easy access to the internet and social media. What do they do on their phone? iGen 12th graders spend an average of 2.25 hours a day texting, 2 more hours on top of that surfing the web, 1.5 additional hours a day on video games, and about a half an hour on video chat. That's just under 6 hours. Middle schoolers spend 45 minutes less time texting and 30 minutes less surfing the web, but they're still getting in their 1.5 hour quota of video games and the same half an hour of video chat, totaling about 5 hours. These are 2016 numbers. Here we see that texting has actually gone down a little, although that line at the top is literally 2.5 hours a day of texts, in favor of increased time on the internet and especially social media. Social media is the thing, not a surprise. They're also not sleeping. These are the percentage of teens getting 2 or more hours less sleep per night. 1 out of 3 teens sleeps with their phone physically inside the bed. Let's go back to the sex thing for a second. I said earlier that iGeners are less intimate than any generation since basically ever. Is that true? How could that possibly be true? What about all these magazine covers and TV shows? Did we not read? The Nancy Jo Sales Vanity Fair article that made the rounds in 2015, everyone read this article. I read it, and I don't even read Vanity Fair. It was presented as a sort of shock value thing to sell a lot of copies, maybe scare parents. I encourage you to think critically when coming across things like this. Unlike JAMA, Science, or Nature, Vanity Fair is not a peer-reviewed scholarly journal. Like the 2014 Pew Research study on kids reading, this is just another classic example of terrible journalism. Nancy Jo, who I'm sure is a fabulous person, makes her points by relying almost entirely on 4 anecdotal stories with different students. It's very vivid, but it's way too narrow in scope for us to buy the conclusions that it wants us to believe. By contrast, check out this super boring cover. A February 2017 study conducted by 3 universities surveying 27,000 people found that iGeners and millennials are having less sexual contact of any kind than any generation since the 1920s. Think about that for a second. We're talking about teenagers and 20-somethings. Also, we're talking about the 1920s, not exactly a promiscuous time period. The Spanish flu had just infected 500 million people and killed off 4.5% of the global population. You read that in the paper and you just want to keep it in your pants. So it's all the more staggering that young people today are less intimate than any generation since then. This represents percentages of adults aged 20 to 24 reporting no sexual partners, period, during that age frame, organized by birth decade. Notice that we double, going from boomers at 6% to millennials at 15%. If you think Tinder and related apps are having some sort of seismic impact, keep in mind that Pokemon Go is more than twice as popular as Tinder. I'm not too interested in declaring whether this stuff is right or wrong, but a bigger question might be, why is it happening? Well, if you spend more time online, that's probably going to translate into less time with real people. Basically, everything that involved face-to-face interaction or had something to do with the real world has gone right out the window. Now, some of this stuff is great. I'm not going to try and say it's a bad thing that there's less car crashes, teen pregnancies, or kids getting drunk and fighting behind Taco Bell. That's obviously wonderful. I'm harping on sex because it's something everybody claims to want. What would we introduce into our lives that would possibly push that aside and be more compelling to us than the validation that comes from being vulnerable with somebody you care about? Phone usage is an interesting thing. Dr. Jean Twenge tells a student telling her, "My whole life is on my phone. I'd be nothing without it. My calendar, my friends, everything. My whole life exists on that phone." What struck me about what that student was saying is that he meant it as a positive. That's difficult for me to understand. If I was to say that I'm entirely dependent on my phone and I'd be nothing and nobody without it, I'd be saying so with a modicum of shame and embarrassment over something I'd like to correct. But for this generation and certain other people, having less responsibility and less self-sufficiency is attractive. The phrase adulting, meaning to take care of one's responsibilities except framed as a negative, captures this outlook. Being a responsible adult and having skills is considered unpleasant rather than desirable. The adulting school in Maine teaches young adults how to do things like manage finances and fold laundry. There's a wonderful anecdote of a 22-year-old college student blowing up at one of his faculty members and yelling, "We want you to treat us like children, not adults." Freedom, control, and rebellion. For the first time in memory, these are not what kids want. I guess I don't have an opinion on that, other than to say that I absolutely cannot comprehend it. I guess that just means that I have old people's disease and I have no clue what's going on anymore. For myself, the tactile experience of reality is so attractive. The way I feel after real person-to-person contact that's positive is intoxicating. It's worth whatever risk kids choose to avoid by favoring texting and other methods. Now, is that just my own subjective appraisal, or could there be something unequivocally of value in real human interaction? There is, as it turns out. iGeners are paying the price for their phone usage in a way that makes me feel for them. And not just because of those SAT score drops, that's the least of it. iGeners are the most depressed, most insecure, loneliest, most anxious, and most suicidal generation in history. This graph represents the percentage of high schoolers who report being very happy. Notice the drop after 2011. These are 12th graders who are satisfied with themselves and their lives as a whole. Here we have high schoolers who often feel left out, that's the top line, and often feel lonely, that's the bottom line. Here we are with middle and high schoolers who can't do anything right. That's the line at the top. Think about the frame of mind you have to be in to say that about yourself. Whose life is not useful. That's the middle line. Bottom line is those reporting that they do not enjoy life. These are 80% increases in a 2-year period to all-time highs. Here, depressive symptoms by sex. All of these depression statistics are higher for females because they use social media more. 1 in 5 girls is a recipient of cyberbullying as opposed to 1 in 10 for boys. They may not be fighting behind Taco Bell anymore, but it's not like they're not hurting. These are entering college students reporting mental health issues, again, an increase in the exponential curve after 2011. This is kind of interesting. Unemployment and depression running totally unrelated, almost in inverse, like being unemployed makes you happy. But the dotted line of smartphone adoption forming a close parallel, we may as well say exact parallel, with depressive symptoms. And not the most pleasant thing to think about, this is for 12 and 14-year-olds. The suicide rate jumps for that age group. Girls attempt suicide more often than boys do, but boys tend to use more effective means, which is why their line is higher. Subsequent studies involving control groups using Facebook versus not using Facebook, other social media, as well as smartphones in general, have pointed out that the use of these devices, particularly in conjunction with social media, incontrovertibly both decrease happiness and increase depressive symptoms in major depressive episodes as defined by the NIH. To quote the Millennial Generation Research Review done by the Chamber of Commerce, health trends indicate that millennials could be the first generation in over a century to see their lifespan level off and even decline. This is in spite of the significant medical progress that is transpiring now. If you're looking for a lucrative industry, mental health counseling, get in there. You will be needed. It's going to explode. Now, there is a bright side here. The cause of all this is very specific. These graphs illustrate how clear the issue is. Factors that contribute to a relative risk of being unhappy on the right. Notice social networking and the internet on the bottom. That's those big black bars there. Items that decrease the risk of being unhappy, basically stuff that makes you happy. All things that you actually do in the real world, like exercise, hanging out, books, even homework. Risk factors for loneliness. Again, totally cut and dried. Social media increases loneliness. In-person interaction decreases it. Relative risk of depressive symptoms, social media, once again on the bottom. Items that reduce depressive symptoms, exercise, in-person group activities with print media, and I love this, homework, still showing up as a reducer of depression. Who would have thought that possible? I should point out that the negative effects of smartphone use primarily have to do with social media use and are only statistically viable with 2 hours or more use per day. You have to be on your phone more than 2 hours a day for anything I'm saying to apply to you. Unlike heroin, unlike cocaine, alcohol, or nicotine, the cause of all this on an individual level is, comparatively speaking, so easy to beat. You just put down your phone. It's that simple. We're not talking about a substance addiction with immediate deleterious neurological effects on brain chemistry and an end game where you're sleeping behind a dumpster. I'm aware that behavioral addictions are no joke, but with the exception of gambling, they do not have the same brain impact as substance addictions. And the reason technology is easier to break free from is because you're moving from something unnatural to something natural. Let's think about how humans have interacted for the past 90,000 plus years. Connecting in person is wired into us over millennia, no pun intended, to be something we like. And that's why it makes us feel good. We're not going to be able to successfully deviate or eradicate that biological inclination within a lifetime. I find all of this information liberating. It's a serious, devastating issue reaching into every aspect of society with a simple, singular, and all things considered easy to execute solution. That doesn't happen very often. We can choose to use our phones as a tool, not a replacement for our life, and especially our social life. Everyone in this room is old enough to remember how to do that. You can do it again, it'll make you feel better. Even if you're not old enough, though, I have a feeling you still know what I'm talking about. Jean Twenge writes about one of her study subjects, Athena, a 13-year-old girl who one day told her, I'm trying to talk to my friends or something, and they don't actually look at my face. They're looking at their phone or they're looking at their Apple Watch. And Dr. Twenge asks her, what does that feel like when you're trying to talk to somebody face-to-face and they're not looking at you? Athena replies, it kinda hurts. It hurts. I could be talking about something super important to me and they wouldn't even be listening. Once my friend was texting with her boyfriend when I was trying to talk to her about my family, and she was like, yeah, whatever. So I took her phone out of her hands and threw it on my wall. What's wild to me about that is Athena is not old enough to know of a different world of communication. Like the heroes and heroines in Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence, She has the ability to imagine a better world even though she's never experienced it. Because there's history inside of her, generations of inclinations and desires. The artist and curator Kate Alkarni once told me, "My arms stretch this wide. Within this sphere is where I can affect change. Beyond that, I don't have a lot of control. But here with the people I touch in my daily life, that is what I can do, the individual level. How do you change the world? You don't. You change the person next to you. And how do you do that? By not trying to change them, by being yourself, leading by example." My friend Leroy, whom you may know from the blog, Leroy was once riding my bus and telling me about his job at Pike Place Market. He worked there as a food tour guide. And he was lamenting to me that he's never going to have the large-scale impact that Jay-Z has in affecting people's lives with messages of his choosing. And I replied by saying, okay, first of all, stop comparing yourself to Jay-Z, because he's got nothing on you. Jay-Z is always going to fall short, because the impact you make on people is more potent than anything Jay-Z can do, because you, Leroy, interact directly, person to person with people. And we as the biological human animal, we experience life singly as individuals. That is why we feel lonely all the time, and that is why we like feeling loved. And that is the most powerful way to reach someone, person to person, not idea to person or media to person. The most significant art act we can accomplish is how we live our lives, and more specifically, how we treat people. We've helped form their view of what's possible. A passenger I write about in my book, Rachel, once told me, we have a responsibility to love others, be kind to others, so that they can know what it feels like, because it feels great. It's almost a duty. And people learn best by example. I was driving the 49 one night recently when a girl got on holding a pizza box. She was several years younger than me. And while she was paying the fare, I said, "Hi, how are you?" It took her so long to reply that at first I thought she must not have heard me. It was a totally new idea for her, but she adapted in the last second and replied by saying, "Good, how are you?" That was kind of exciting, but what was really exciting was she went and sat down somewhere where she could see me and watched me for the whole ride as I did my thing of saying hi to everyone, saying bye to everyone, announcing all the stops and everything else that I do. Her face was bright and rich with excitement. And when it was time for her to leave, she yelled an enthusiastic thank you from the middle doors, telling me to have a good night with a tone I could tell was entirely heartfelt. This sort of stranger interaction was new to her, seemed new to her, but it was attractive and it felt comfortable. As I said earlier, we're wired for connection. Even if it's just a little piece of small talk, what are we really saying to each other when someone says, "How's it going?" Sounds almost like they're asking you how your day is. Sometimes that's true. But more often they're communicating something which I find equally comforting. They're saying, "I respect you." They're recognizing you with a sense of togetherness. We're equals, and I want to take a moment to recognize that. It isn't that the weather is so scintillating a topic you absolutely have to discuss it with strangers. It's shorthand for something altogether more meaningful. The number of times I've defused situations on the bus merely by asking somebody how they're doing. There's real communication happening there. Confucius wrote that pleasantries do not make us better people, but they keep us at the good quality that we're already at. Respect and acknowledgement. This is what we can do as individuals. Usually it's got to be you who initiates the interaction, but that was always true here in Seattle. Before we had all this tech stuff, we had the Seattle freeze. We should be experts at this by now. And we can follow in the lead of young people. Yes, young people are statistically more narcissistic and entitled. That's millennials more than iGeners, actually. More selfish, but also more tolerant, more accepting. Those values sound contradictory, but they're actually both effects of what social psychologists call an individualistic society as opposed to a collectivistic one. A collectivistic society is where people think of themselves as part of existing groups like religion, race, or career. Individualistic societies, on the other hand, which America has started becoming ever since the boomer generation, conceives of the individual as its own entity rather than part of a group. This is why younger folks are, yes, more self-absorbed, but it's also why they're not as hung up on gender, race, or orientation. Those are inconsequential. to them to a degree no other generation, not even my own, can remotely pretend to simulate. The rest of us are operating on semblances of what previous generations have taught us. We learn that and we work with it. This is the first group that appears to have its own self-contained understanding of gender and race, and that's reason to get really excited. If we can get to a place where sexual assault and the male entitlement that informs so much of it recedes out of normative behavior, I can't think of a more beautiful landslide change than that. If that happens, I'm not going to complain about they're not reading magazines or whatever else. Not important. We can all learn from each other. Generations usually orient their biggest objectives around what they don't have. Surveys have found previous generations listing money and power as what they want most of life. iGeners instead say what they want most is happiness, love, and friendship. I find that touching. I find it very sad. And I also find it really hopeful, because forgetting about age groups, that's what I try to offer and seek out on the bus lines. There are things that happen out there you would never think of if you don't drive buses, things you see. A teen helping an older woman from the opposite side of the globe with her groceries without being asked. A husband riding a loop to cool off after an argument with his spouse at home. Kids growing up, kids I knew as children who are now going to college. Kids who behave one way when they're in a group, trying to be hard and loud and emotionless, whom you discover the next night are totally different people when they're alone. Sleepers that the city won't house, who've got the strangest problem, too much time rather than too little. The sensation of being on familiar speaking terms, not with a few friends and a dozen coworkers, but a few dozen thousand people. It's a very different view, and there is so much kindness. A bus driver waiting for me, a passenger in a strange city, picking me up in between bus stops when he didn't have to, and if he hadn't have done that, I would have missed my plane. A guy thanking me when I gave him a free transfer, saying, "You have no idea." Buses are one of the last places in Western advanced society where people cannot avoid each other. Buses are the social experiment collapsed into a single mobile room. They open up the possibility for interaction, community, a common way of coexisting. The fact that things so often more or less work out on them is both a miracle and a testament. Buses tell us what we choose to believe. Whatever version of humanity you think exists, you will find out there. And you'll act it out, too. Go out there, as a passenger recently told me she does, and think of everyone as your friend. It's not going to work all the time. No Outlook does. But if it works most of the time, it might be useful. What if the city at large acted like this, thought like this? Not like me, per se, but with the perspective and attitude so many wonderful colleagues and friends and parents and teachers and all the rest have shown me. Believing in goodness, nudging it, nurturing it along. You may wonder, is it worth it to be good out there in that tornado of pain and anger and sorrow and love and joy and danger? When I wonder that, I turn to this George Eliot quote. Let's use her real name, Mary Ann Evans. I turn to this Mary Ann Evans quote from Middlemarch, which she wrote in 1871. If you've seen a certain film this holiday past season, you'll recognize it. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. I'd like to end with a story. A companion and I were walking up to the neighborhood post office with a handful of packages. This was before Elliott Bay carried my book, when I was selling the book basically out of my back door. In each package was a signed copy of my book, and in each book, of course, was the Avery story. Avery, whom you remember from earlier. Avery with the indefatigable attitude whose welfare and appearance I watched gradually wane over a period of years. He came to mind because the guy standing outside the post office looked a lot like him. Wait a second. Could it be? Was that him? Standing there by the main doors, the same but different as ever with a big smile? But look how put together he is now. Yes, he was still selling real change, but he was doing it looking sharp. The dreads clean and fresh, no debris therein nor on his clothing. A trademark collection of black beanie, black carpenters, black sweatshirt, hooded of course, with shoes I forgot to notice. So powerfully did his effervescent grin offset his outfit, which another man might wear without knowing the first thing about how to make it as approachable endearing, and downright personable as Avery did. Clean was clearly the word of the day, spotless. His pride of self and belief in life were palpable. Risen back up to the best moments of my first knowing him and possibly beyond. His attitude must have played a role in how that turned out, right? Isn't that how it works? Makes you wonder sometimes. The post office was just opening for the day and a small crowd had gathered, the early birds with letters and packages. I could see that he had put in the effort, like I try to be known and loved by the community, the friendly neighborhood stalwart. They knew him and they smiled. Never mind that they were North Seattle white and he was a poor black man on the corner. I saw real enthusiasm in their interactions and several knew him by name. This is where we start, I thought to myself, in the massive undertaking of correcting history's wrongs by tending to the living. Avery, I called out sharply, mock serious, and he turned. He turned, he saw, and he blew up. He exploded. Pure joy. This man on this corner today, this was the face and name of jubilation. And he remembered my name. How did he still know my name all these years later? I'm surprised enough when people recognize me out of uniform, but let alone remember my name another half decade on and on the far side of town to boot. Our small talk was the conversation to end all small talk. Our how you been doing and man, it's good to see you exchanges were overflowing with so much love, surprise, respect, and awe. It must have looked ridiculous from the outside, comical. But you know the feeling. My shock had mostly to do with the fact that my hopes, as written 5+ years ago, could actually have come true, that this world had room for him to rise again. After a chat, my companion and I went inside to mail our book packages. You're wondering, did I tell him about the book? No, I didn't. Nor about how much his story means to me. Let me find the right time. I'll find the right time. This was more important, what was going on right now. Not depictions or documentations of life, but life. The burgeoning immediate present of his accomplishments, not mine. I was struck by an air which seemed to be affecting everyone, something magical about this place today. When did you last see the staff happy at a post office? The spry older woman in charge who steered our small talk into what she loved about the job, who called out to customers she knew and spoke of the day's hardships, being understaffed mainly, with a voice that knew there's more to life than complaining. People chatted amongst each other, chuckling, even a pat on the shoulders here and there. Others walked out past Avery, wishing him well all over again. He eagerly waved them on with a grin that started and restarted the whole experience. Was I asleep? Had I been dreaming? If this was in a movie, we wouldn't believe it. If Nathan dreamt of a post office, then yes, this is what it would look like. But it was no dream, no movie. Only in life could something as absurd happen as a happy post office wherein the customers standing in line, the overworked staff, and the homeless guy out front are all having the time of their lives at 8 a.m. on a weekday. This was the post office's fairy tale. Community, big and bright as life. Now, a cynic might roll their eyes, insisting something has to be wrong here, but I have no patience for that. Let us remember that realists are forever doomed to mediocrity because they lack the necessary naivete to believe in the possibility of great things. They lack the requisite capacity to imagine. A realist wouldn't even notice that this building was on fire in the best way. My own attitude may have played a role in shaping the place that morning, sure. It's a delicate and mysterious dance, how that all works. But I credit Avery most of all. He who embodied what my parents taught me from day one. You have to generate your own happiness from scratch, from within. Anything else is a setup for failure. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you all. Thank you.
So we're going to do some Q&A here. Rachel has a microphone, which she's going to pass around to the person who wants to ask the question, because we all want to hear you. Your question's important. Here comes Rachel with the good stuff.
How come we don't have a bus on Alki?
I love this. What a great question. I very much hope that's what you were thinking the whole time. Because it's just as important. Why is there no bus to Alki? When they cut the 56, which provided all-day service from downtown to the beach, was that smart or was that not smart? It was not smart. I talked to service planners about stuff like this, and there's factions inside Metro who are like, let's keep the route versus let's get rid of the route. One of the most intense sort of tete-a-tetes like that was the 43. When light rail was being installed, there was one faction who wanted to keep the 43 for reasons that are probably obvious, and then there's the other faction who wanted to get rid of it because they're like, oh, the light rail's basically the same thing, they can walk. Yeah, I'm shaking my head too. Exactly. No one's going to backtrack, and there's. If I was a dictator who ran Metro, the 56 would still be here, the 43 would be here, there'd be this overloaded bus service. There's sort of a different way of thinking about overlaying multimodal transit here as compared to other places. If you've been in other cities, every place besides Seattle, when it's implementing rapid ride bus service, bus rapid transit, installs that as an overlay over existing routes. They don't delete the route that it's replacing. For example, we would still have the 358, and then the E-line would be able to make less stops. When you install an express route as the only service on a corridor, it's burdened with having to stop everywhere, which defeats the purpose. We all know it's not rapid. So you and I, let's go get that 56 reinstated, because who wants to take the light rail to the 50 and do that whole thing?
Yeah, as usual, so much insight and
Thank
so
you, Ellen.
poignantly, and I will say simply and directly shared. And I remember just a brief quote from a famous pianist of the past, Arthur Rubinstein, about happiness. He says, you can't accept it on condition. And I think you embodied that in what you were saying too. It has to come from within. There can't be circumstances, I'll be happy if. And what you said embodies so much of that, and everything you say and do and write embodies that sharing
Thank you
and that humanity.
so much for saying that. When I was first driving, you guys are wonderful. Gosh, thank you. Wow. When I was first driving bus, it was this sort of series of, you could almost call them step increases of how much of my colleagues did not take my perspective seriously. Because when it's your first day driving, no one cares that you're happy. It's not believable. And as the first year goes by, they're still like, okay, wait till you've been here 2 years, And then you've been there 2 years, and then it's like, wait till you've been here 5 years. Wait till you've driven at night. And we've all worked jobs or been in environments where we've been underestimated. And I hesitated in going full-time for a long time because I thought, well, gosh, I don't want to transform both physically and mentally in a way that a lot of operators were telling me that I was going to. And there was ample evidence that, wow, this is what I'm going to turn into, and that scares me. And it's possible to just continue to be yourself. And I realize that is sounds like a superficial and cliche statement, but I hope that I have at least some amount of experience to make that statement substantive, and that I'm doing the route that no one likes in the middle of the night, and now bus drivers no longer say, wait till you do this or that, because I'm already doing it. And I'm very grateful that they accept me as just crazy bus driver who's always happy and we don't understand why. Yes.
Hi, my name is Yasugura.
Hello, Yasugura.
Yeah, I'm an autonomous vehicle transportation planner, and I'm working on creating policies for state of Washington when it comes to equity and health within
Thanks for being
self-driving
here.
cars. Yeah, so I'm very interested in learning from community and understanding this, these types of conversations that happen very personally when it comes to, Uber or Lyft cars, but then even at, let's say you are driving a bus that carries about 53 to 43 people, or maybe even 63 to 83
Sure.
amount of people.
Let's pack 100 in there.
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Yeah.
But I've always been interested in understanding when it comes to gender identity and the type of issues that you see when, let's say, for the experience of women or maybe
Yeah.
transgender women
Yeah.
within buses. How do you think that's going to change when it comes to maybe sharing a vehicle with self-driving cars?
Okay, so what we're asking, to briefly recap, is how will that element of acceptance, transition, safety. Okay, it would probably improve. I would imagine that buses are, you know, they can feel like a war zone sometimes, and they can feel like you have to really be, you know, putting your armor on. And I realize that this is why more than a few people will wear headphones, not because they're listening to something, but because there's a safety concern. There's a personal bubble concern. These are valid things to worry about. And I imagine an autonomous vehicle that doesn't have anybody in it would totally obviate that concern. And that's one of the few benefits that I see as inarguable. I recently had 2 people coming on who were contracted out by the county to come up with public art for the Rainier Rapid Ride line. And the most exciting part of our conversation was that the benefits of Rapid Ride are very quantifiable. There's a slight increase in speed, there's greater number of vehicles, the all-door boarding speeds things up. But there is also something huge that's lost, and that's the community. I don't get to talk to people if I'm driving a Rapid Ride. They all get on the back doors. That's a loss both from a community standpoint, but also a safety standpoint. Because when everyone has to come to the front and say hi to me as they're entering, I get to make eye contact, I get to say, how's it going? And I cannot tell you how ironclad of a tool that is in setting the tone for the bus. And the reason less stuff happens on my 7 as compared to other people's 7s, I think probably has to do with that. And when there's more of an autonomous component, all of that goes away. When I'm driving the E-line, the people that I really need to be saying hi to are definitely getting on the back door. And I felt more joy when I was doing that when it was the 358. As wild as that route was, because you had an opportunity to connect. And as we move toward more autonomous environments, there's something that risks being lost that's hard to quantify, it's hard to monetize, and therefore it's all the more at risk of being lost. And I'm glad that those contractors were excited to talk to me about how do we sustain community? What can we do in our model that's comparable to PCC getting rid of their automated checkouts because they value the person-to-person interaction? Yes, okay, Meredith.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Oh,
hi.
yeah, hey. So have you noticed a difference among the various generations, boomer, iGen, whatever, when the bus is crowded and you need to move to the back?
Absolutely. But I will say that when I was 10 years old and I got up to move for somebody to sit down, I remember older people looking at me with shock and delight. So that means that must have been unusual 20 years ago, as well as now. I don't want to say that, oh my gosh, no one cares anymore, et cetera, but there are certain things that kind of are real. I witnessed a horrible pedestrian car accident in the late 90s over in Northgate, which I'm not going to describe because it was unbelievably awful. But the sound of the impact was so loud that everybody came running from all directions. That would not happen now because people they wouldn't hear the contact. And not only that, but there's a different attitude of like, gosh, there's so much wrong in this world. I'm just going to stay in my own little thing here and keep that working. And I can understand that. And I don't feel qualified to have a good answer to your question. I'm sort of rambling. I'm going to think about that. Thank you. Yeah, I saw some hands.
Hi, Hi, thank you. Do you have any thoughts on the prospect of abolishing fares and making the buses free for all riders?
I feel like we're moving toward that. The management has a really great handle on understanding transit as something that needs to be provided to all people. They care a lot about the gentleman in charge, the GM, who I am lucky to be friends with, talks about how there's certain elements that need to be fulfilled, like we need to serve these underserved areas. There's concern about de-emphasizing the criminal nature of evading fare because that can interfere with other more important things like getting housing or so on. You can get disqualified. And I wonder if we'll move toward that, and I wonder how it would change. I imagine that would change the nature of the beast in ways that we're not aware of. It'd certainly speed things up. But yeah, something to think about. Yeah.
I had a question. I will say that I am of that millennial generation.
Me too.
And I did connect a lot with what you mentioned, and sometimes not being able to connect with my own generation. But I am wondering, as someone who does so much emotional connecting on the job on a regular basis, are there ever moments when you're drained or it's kind of hard to balance, and what do you do to counter that?
No one's ever asked me that before. Thank you. I tell colleagues of mine that it's not a double standard to decide to hang on to every positive interaction and to let all the negative stuff roll off your back. We know that's difficult, but the idea. And the reason I don't think that's a double standard is because when you're in a customer service context and somebody's mean to you, it's usually not because of you. They're usually angry about something else. But when they're nice to you, it usually is because of you, because you've done something. And I try to hang on to what's the originating impulse for this behavior that I'm on the receiving end of. Is it always easy? No. There are some days that are pretty difficult. But I enjoy bus driving because there's continually more distractions. Somebody's going to get on who has no clue what just happened, and we start the whole thing over where I'm like, I like your hat, and then we start talking about hats, and everything's lovely. Yes, and then I saw that you had your hand up as well. Please.
Oh, I'd like to know if you could give me any advice about how to deal with Metro. They want to shorten or do away with a large part of the 45 in Crown Hill, which is also
I was reading about that, yeah.
a designated hit neighborhood to have more, to be an urban village. It's gonna have
Yes.
tons of
There's real
multiple-
potential there.
And yet they want to cut off the 45, and it now goes from in front of my building to the U District. It goes to Greenwood to go shopping.
And it's been doing that for decades.
And it goes to
Yeah.
Golden Gardens. And
Yeah.
how do you fight Metro? I mean, what do
So-
we have to do?
I don't know if I'm allowed to share this, but let's just share it anyways. We'll
Okay.
keep it between ourselves. If you can get, I forget if the number is 25 or 30, but if you can get 25 or 30 people to protest a change before it's implemented, it gets kicked up to a higher level of analysis, and oftentimes it won't happen. So like they wanted to split the two into two things, Madrona to downtown and Queen Anne to downtown, and not have them linked anymore. They wanted to get rid of the 4, some really sort of things that brought on a lot of reaction. And those didn't happen because, I believe, because of the number of responses. I was driving the 4 at the time. I was asking everyone, get online and do this whole thing. And it worked. We still have the 4. Yeah, or just have a book club with a bunch of your friends and be like, let's talk about the 45. Wow. Yeah. Exactly. See, there we go. I saw your hand. Her hand has been up for a while. Okay, great. Yeah, please. Okay. You're wonderful. We'll get to you guys.
Who's the entertaining bus driver? I've encountered him on the 21. He sings rock and roll songs.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this guy?
Yeah, Underwood is his name, and he's got the safari hat, and he sings songs and stuff. Yeah, he gets as many complaints as he does commendations. He's a very divisive figure, because some days you don't want to hear it, jokes and songs for 45 minutes. And sometimes it's fantastic. And I asked him one night when I'd gotten yelled at because I was having a friendly conversation with somebody at the front, and I went over to him at the end of my shift and said, how do you respond when you get all these complaints? And he said, you just have to continue to do you. You just have to go out there. He pulled out of his pocket, he had 2 complaints and 2 commendations. He was like, you just have to totally disregard all this and do your thing. And I found that inspirational. I don't tell jokes or do the songs. First of all, I can't sing, but also, I don't know. I don't know if I would want to hear that every day or do that every day. Yes, hi.
Yeah, hi. First of all, as someone who's born in '95, I appreciate.
Sweet. I'm so happy
I
you're
get
here.
It. I appreciate the comments about generalities, and I won't take it personally.
Please don't. We
my
love
question, I genuinely don't mean to devil's advocate or give the Facebook perspective or anything. I was very lucky to grow up in a community with lots of community, religious, ethnic, etc. But for those who don't have that privilege, the thing that makes me hopeful about social media is the opportunity to give people community disengaged from geography or neighborhood. And I'm curious, I don't really know what I'm asking besides your thoughts on that opportunity, how to draw that out, how to bring that out, etc.
My thoughts would be that I agree. And thinking about my training's in film and photo and stuff, perhaps and I really like how now somebody in Red Wing, Minnesota can watch Atlantics, the new Cannes film winner from Senegal, which they never would have gotten at Hollywood Video or wherever else. And that there's access to experience a certain amount of culture that was never available before, as long as you've got an internet connection. And there's something to be said for that that's undeniably positive. And I'm glad you bring it up because we need to balance out, it's not all bad or all good. Yeah.
I just want to check if there's any questions in the back because I realize it's easier for me to see hands in the front. We have time for maybe 3 more questions. So if there's anyone back here while I'm looking at you, please raise your hand high.
What's your favorite bus to drive? And I guess I have one other question.
Okay.
I ran into one bus driver who had Beanie Babies in the front of the bus.
Oh, that's a great idea.
20, 30 of them. I kind of felt like if there would have been an accident, I would have had padding.
Padding, yeah.
Okay.
I think I know that operator. Her name is slipping my mind right now. Oh, gosh, possibly. Kathleen, okay. Fabulous. She should be here. My favorite route to do is the 7 and the 49 combination, which when I was going to college was just the whole thing was called the 7. It goes from Rainier Beach to the U District. And it's just the most beautiful mix of everything in Seattle. Rainier Avenue and Broadway do not have the Seattle freeze. They are high energy in ways that are totally unrelated. And getting to do one route that traverses all of that. And to make familiar in your life an entire, the vastness of South Seattle. It's huge. And when I was a student at UW, that didn't enter into the consciousness of all of my wonderful UW classmates. It was about Capitol Hill, the U District, and Belltown. But there is so much life happening out there. And to just continue down Rainier Avenue, where there's continuous ons and offs for 45 minutes, and to be confronted with this vastness of language and culture, and I don't even know what else, stuff that I don't understand. It's just a joy. And then to balance that out with the 49, it's a delight. I love talking to people on Broadway. Yeah. Beanie Babies, I'll get some. That's a good idea. Yes. Okay, yeah, please.
I have a practical question about bus driving.
Please, yeah. I love tech talk.
Where do you go when you have to go? And when do you eat? And where do you eat?
Yeah. What crucial questions. So In terms of going when you have to go, I love that question got applause. I love the bathroom question. It's the most important thing. Most routes have bathrooms at the terminals. Some of them are like small buildings that have been constructed by Metro. Those are called comfort stations. Great name. Other comfort stations are the product of negotiations with Metros, working with a local business like a restaurant where the drivers are allowed to walk in there and use the restroom, and it's incredibly essential. You're encouraged to use the restroom all the time because who knows what's going to happen. You're allowed to get out of the bus in the middle of the route and go into Shell gas station, but that's embarrassing. I don't want to do that. And I appreciate that it's allowed, but sometimes on the route book listing of all the restrooms that a particular route has, they'll show you something that's like across the street and 2 blocks away. There's no way I'm going to use that when I'm in service. And so it's really helpful to get routes that have bathrooms at the terminals. Some routes don't, and you've got to just not drive those. And if you have a particularly crappy operator, it may be that they haven't used a restroom in 6 hours or something. And Metro's gotten better about that. There was a kerfuffle a couple years ago where Route 36 operators didn't have access to running water for 6 years. That's been changed. And life is more than just a porta potty. In terms of eating, I bring my food. I have this philosophy where I try to like take my break while I'm driving the route. Just like, I may not get to the terminal. I'm just gonna enjoy life right now. You know, it's that whole thing of, do you like hustle as hard as you can before you get to the end of the line, sort of like working as much as you can up until you retire, or do you just enjoy life right now because you might not ever retire or might not make it to that point? Driving the bus is so conducive to these sorts of life metaphors. Life is a journey, you know, all the rest. Yeah. Yes, I saw a hand up here.
We have time for one more question. Okay.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
Our kids laugh at us because we take the bus so much, but it's so easy. But
And so fun.
One of the things that I've been concerned about lately is there is so much crime at 3rd and Pike and Pine.
Indeed.
And that is a prime transfer area. Is
Yes.
Metro doing anything to, I mean, I know it's not their fault or even probably their
Right.
position to do anything, but it does seem to be a concern for a lot of bus riders.
Exactly,
Has
yeah.
riders gone down? I mean, the ridership gone down because of it, or are they looking to change anything in that area?
The ridership has gone down for routes that used to use the bus tunnel, but that might have more to do with how much slower those routes are now. Like if the 41 trying to get out of town, it's a totally different experience now. In terms of Pike Pine, yeah, I totally agree. It's more in the purview of the city than Metro to address, but it just doesn't look good to show tourists, because all tourists go through 3rd and Pine. Here's how we treat our people. Meanwhile, look at all this luxury building that we're doing. Yeah, it doesn't send off a particularly flattering vibe. Some action has taken place in terms of 3rd and James, sort of a comparable crew that hangs out there. And one solution was to move the zone at 3rd and James up 1 block to being between James and Cherry. I see that as sort of a Band-Aid solution that does absolutely nothing. Moving bus stops away from where people already are hanging out is not addressing the problem. Let's find out why they're hanging out there. It's complicated. Let's learn, et cetera, et cetera. And I hope something happens there because the recent incident scared a lot of people. And yeah. And there's different ways of doing it. There's plans to install more luxury restaurants, for example, as a way of pricing out the people who are in that area. Oddly, McDonald's is gonna stay there. There's no plans to move that, but most fast food has been eliminated from downtown for that reason. There used to be Red Robin downtown. But again, I'm not sure that that's the best approach. Yeah. Anyways, okay, Rachel, yes.
Yes, thank you. Let's give another round of applause.
Thank
for
you
Rachel.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And Nathan will be at the back signing books, correct?
Please come over and say
so
hi. You
if
came
you'd like
all
to
the
say
way here.
hi,
I want to
we
talk
also
to
have
you.
books for sale in the MOHAI Mercantile. And whatever mode of transportation you use to get here, please have a safe, wonderful journey back to wherever you're going, and check our website for upcoming events. Thank you.
Stick around and say hi. I love you all. Thank you for coming. Hi.